Okay, this is 1812, the War on the Great Lakes Frontier, or I guess technically it's 1812! Exclamation point. The War on the Great Lakes Frontier. I am playing the big 2-map full campaign scenario because, of course, and just about getting close to being done with the 1812 summer season turn. As you can see, it goes 1812 through 1814. Season by season, this will end in autumn of 1814. Interesting map. It's unusual to have a game where the maps run end to end like this, but they do have a very nice period look to them. There's these naval and land combat cards for if you're playing it opposed. You'll arrange your units on this little battle board, and the arrangement will have an impact on how they conduct combat. But when you're playing solitaire, the game has provided like a simplified combat that uses these fire effect table for land combat and this broadside table and wind gauge for naval combat. That makes things easier where you're not dealing with hidden information, or because you're not really supposed to know how your opponent has organized their troops on these cards before you start. And then you've got combat cards and stuff that you can play too, and different position cards that will, or action cards that will determine, what happens during the combat. Similar to if you've ever played the Battles of the American Revolution series there from GMT, that's got a similar situation where you're picking tactics chits, essentially. In this case, you're playing these sort of tactics cards that will have an impact on your combat, and all that's done away with when you're playing solitaire. I mean, presumably you can use this if you're not playing solitaire. This is just a way that helps solitaire players by eliminating the hidden information and playing cards and stuff. But you could easily use this in an opposed game as well. It just replaces all that with a standard, more traditional fire combat table based on strength points. So that's what I've been using so far. I just have these out because they're a handy way to lay out your units when they're fighting each other, so you can tally up your strength points easily. So what's happened? Not very much. I mean, the game has a slow start. A lot of the activations of the U.S. forces were to finish building their ships. Most of the ships start on here, as you can see here on the setup chart, that all these ships are unconstructed. So you have to spend a lot of ops points building your ships if you want to make sure that you've got vessels to oppose the British, because the British, most of their ships start constructed, meaning the Americans are kind of behind the 8 ball in terms of naval strength at the start of the game. So they have to kind of fight to keep up. The British have amassed some forces down here on Lake Champlain, and the Americans responded by having Dearborn march up from Albany to Plattsburgh, New York, on Lake Champlain. The U.S. starts with 2 ships that I had to build here, but then I had a card that allowed me to add the vessel Pert here, and it's hard to see on camera, but there's 2 dots there in the upper left corner, a black and a white one. Generally, you want those black dots because those are D8s on the fire combat table. White dots are D6s, and so the black dots are your heavier guns, essentially, so you can do more damage with those. So that's sort of stalemate here. Neither side has advanced, mainly because they've been focused elsewhere. The Brits have been doing some naval activity on Lake Ontario, and the Americans had a ship up here at Ogdensburg to start, and the Brits moved up the St. Lawrence River and destroyed the United States vessel that was there, and then moved down here to attempt to do the same on Sackett's Harbor. The Americans responded, had a card that brought Commodore Elliott on the board, and he's moved up there with the Scourge, the Hamilton, and the Julia to try and take on the Royal George, who was going to try and pick off these individual ships one by one. Hopefully the U.S. now has enough ships there to take out the Royal George. The Brits will have to respond by moving the Smith and probably some more of their vessels over here on this end of Lake Ontario. The other thing that the U.S. focused on was they had some reinforcements come on over here in New York and moved them as quickly as they could over to the Niagara area, because I had an array of cards that were going to help me with combat on the Niagara Peninsula. I had a card that allowed me to last season had a card that allowed me to reduce the regiment that was here at Fort George, and then had another card this turn that allowed me to reduce the regiment again, which eliminated it, and that was this 1st of the 41st Regiment here that was under Brock. And the whole reason I orchestrated this entire offensive was because I had a card here, the Death of Isaac Brock. Play this card after any combat in which Brock is present. Draw one card. So anytime you have a reaction card or a post-combat card or a card that you would play out of sequence where you're not using the ops, then you draw another card to replace it, because you always have to have the same amount of cards as the opposing player. But this was a chance to kill Brock, who's one of the best commanders that the British have. So you can see here, he is a 2-star, 2/2 commander, so he gets a +2 DRM on attack and +2 DRM on defense. The Americans, the only person the Americans have that's anywhere close to that is Winfield Scott. And I was able to get him into the combat. He's got Pike with him because Pike was bringing guys along to add to this American force. They moved up here to Fort George, did the combat, and was able to successfully kill Brock. And they had another card that allowed them to prevent this militia that was at Queenston here from evading, and they were able to eliminate it in combat. And then the Brits had lost should have lost more than, I think they had taken 3-step losses. So they should be, because the Americans took 1-step loss in that combat. And the Brits took at least 2. Now I'm trying to remember what I rolled. It was on the 10 to 14 column. The Americans, it was 2-step losses. So 2 of these units should have flipped. But they retreated back inside with a replacement commander. And now they are under siege by the Americans, and they're going to try and take Fort George and hopefully gain control of the Niagara Peninsula. The Brits are not currently well positioned to reinforce that with ground troops. There's nobody really nearby, which is kind of bad for them. So they're going to have to haul some troops from Quebec as fast as they can, or potentially bring some troops from Fort Malden over here. You can see that giant stack of British forces there at Fort Malden. They're going to have to run them over to the Niagara Peninsula as fast as they can, maybe using bateau movement, which is, like a naval shore movement that allows them to move 15 hexes at the jump. The problem is you've got Hull's army there that's heading up towards Detroit. to also potentially cross over and threaten Fort Malden. So the British are sort of scrambling here. Part of that is I was not, again, you're playing these games solo. You have to pretend you don't know what cards the other side has. So I could see that the U.S. was bringing troops up here, but with what I was able to reinforce from these two settlements up here into after this British regular regiment was eliminated, I brought two more regiments into there and thought, well, with Brock, I should be able to defend it pretty well. But then he was killed, and now they've got a lesser commander in there. But we'll see how they respond to the siege. But the other thing that the British have mainly been focusing on was to try and take out Fort Mackinac here, which I had a card to do that last season or last turn and was not able to pull it off because the fleet here that was under Pring, and I had the card that brought Pring on, so I thought, hey, they'll have a Commodore. I brought another ship in with a card, was able to place a ship on Fort St. Joseph, and so I had the card that was specifically the battle for Fort Mackinac, and I executed it, but then was able to destroy the vessel that the United States had here, and the U.S. had moved the ship that was from Detroit across Lake St. Clair, using the connection here to the St. Clair River, which is right here, and was able to move across Lake Huron to defend the fort here. So they were able to sink the vessel, but not able to destroy the protected fort, which you can see here. This is these little turrets on the end of the settlement indicate that it is a protected fort, as opposed to like this, where that's just a settlement with no inherent defense. So not only did these vessels have to destroy the vessel that was guarding the harbor, but then had to destroy the protected harbor itself, and were not able to do that. And you only get one round of combat in naval combat. Well, in this case, they couldn't, without being able to destroy the harbor defense, the card could not come off, which would have allowed these units to move over there and siege it. So just doing normal naval combat, there's no way that they could do it without actually bringing the units with them. So the card was what I needed and was not able to make it work. So now they're going to have to do it now that they've gotten rid of the vessel, at least they can go back here, pick units up and bring them, do it the old fashioned way, as opposed to the sort of shortcut that I had with the card. Unfortunately, the card just didn't work. So the Brits are trying to gain control of Lake Huron, and that's taking them longer. And I think it's at the expense of what's happening on the Niagara Peninsula, which is going to be very concerning to them, especially here too, because if the Royal George can't get out of that predicament there, they may find themselves getting sunk or captured, and that would be bad news for the British naval control of Lake Ontario, which is the naval control of Lake Ontario is worth a lot of victory points. So, so they've got some work to do to get their forces over. We'll see what they can do on Lake Champlain. Generally, the British have more regulars that are stronger than the U.S., and they have better professional leaders. And I don't know, there's all the ships here. Yeah, they've got Prevost there, who's not great, but still better than Dearborn, who's a 0 across the board. Prevost is good for defense, so if the Americans try and attack, they'll be dealing with that. Same thing here, this guy, I think that's Rottenberg. He can't leave Canada, so he's there primarily for defense. Losing Brock was a blow for the British. I don't know if they have more leaders coming in as reinforcements in 1813. Yeah, they've got, well, Shafe. So Shafe is who replaced Brock after that card went off. You just bring him in early since Brock is dead now. So, yeah, the Brits don't have any more commanders coming in for a while. So we're going to have to make do with what they've got. So we will see if they can recover from that Niagara Peninsula problem. But so far, I'm enjoying this for a Compass game. You know, Compass has a pretty low reputation in terms of putting out very poorly developed games that are almost playtest kits in a box, where the rules are a mess or poorly proofed and edited or what have you. But this has been all very good. There's very little errata on this game so far. No, glaring map or counter errors. There's the only error on the map is that this blue settlement up here should be a red British settlement, which I think could be something that could be fixed with a sticker. We'll have to check Board Game Geek to see if somebody's created an image file to stick over that. But no glaring errata in the rules. I mean, it's like just a couple of lines of errata so far, which is good. And the rules themselves are coherent, well organized. They are a little bit the layout is, it is very case oriented, which is good. But I don't know. I tend to have trouble spotting things in these rules. You do get some lengthier paragraphs. But I think I'm just, it feels like some things you think are going to be in one area and are actually in another area. And so that's really been the only issue that I've had with the rules, is just trying to remember which bits are where. And that's pretty common, for pretty much any wargame rules. Again, they all make sense. And then I watched a playthrough video that the designer posted where he did, like a sample scenario playthrough, which was good, that explained some things. The supply rules were difficult to understand initially. And the key thing was like, well, wait, why? Like, here's your full supply, and then you take away this one unit, and now things are only in partial supply, but they're still well connected. And then you realize, oh, full supply has to go over roads. And if you have to use lake or river hexes or non-road hexes, then you're going to be in partial supply. So that's something that's not spelled out specifically. It's just a difference, like in full supply versus partial supply. It's land or ferry hexes, partial supply, full supply, LOC, and LOC, then you have to go back and look at that and realize, oh, LOC means roads. So it turns out, so a key distinction between full and partial supply requires that you know your terms very closely. And I just didn't, and it was, just a single word distinction, which was partial supply is this, or this, and full supply is only this. Otherwise it seemed identical. So, yeah. So it's just things like that. But again, for what I've seen in other Compass games, the presentation of these, it is glossy, but it's full color. Plenty of great examples, clear, concise rules. The playbook offers like a very lengthy, first of all, just a whole ton of designer notes and card information, history stuff, it's huge. And then, extended example of play. And then a very detailed example of the quick play naval and land combat rules with extended examples. So just really good, well done presentation that's made the game fairly simple to learn. And it is a lot of rule lookups because there's a lot of little things about supply, like again, the supply rules, trying to figure that out. Getting the movement rules, they're not long, the movement rules, but they are very carefully worded. So you have to be careful on how you're using and how you're looking at shore hexes, how you're looking at road hexes and non-road hexes, and where road hexes end and how road hexes interact with the shore. And just you have to be very careful about a lot of things because they're all very precisely worded, and how you can move around. So you can very easily forget or overlook something. And so that you can find yourself unwinding some actions, which I have definitely had to do a few times through these first 2 seasons. So, but I'm enjoying it and looking forward to carrying on. It does play pretty quickly once you get the hang of your movement and supply rules and the combat and all that kind of stuff. So I'm expecting it to move quicker as they go along, but so far it's been pretty fun.